He'll regret losing you. Mafia boss whispered, then proposed as her sister wed her ex. The clink of her father's wineglass against the crystal decanter was the only sound Tessa trusted anymore. It was a predictable, hollow rhythm that marked the end of another Sunday dinner, a ritual she'd come to dread. "Tessa, darling, you've barely touched your veal," her mother, Eleanor, observed, her voice coated in the manufactured brightness that signaled bad news. Tessa forced a smile, pushing the food around on the heavy porcelain. "Just tired, Mom. Long week at the hotel." "Right, the hotel." Her father, Richard Morano, cleared his throat, a sound that always preceded a judgment. He looked at his wife, a silent, practiced cue. Eleanor set her fork down with delicate precision. "Well, we actually have some wonderful news to share, don't we, Amelia?" On the other side of the mahogany table, Tessa's younger sister, Amelia, blushed. It was a perfect, calculated blush, one that matched the pale pink cashmere she wore. "We wanted to wait for the right moment," Amelia murmured, her eyes flicking to Tessa. "Amelia and Ethan are seeing each other," Richard announced, beaming as if he'd just closed a merger. Tessa's fork slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the plate with a sharp crack that echoed in the sudden silence. Ethan. The name felt foreign, acidic. Ethan was her Ethan. 5 years of her life, 5 years of shared holidays, late-night arguments, and whispered plans. 5 years that had ended just 4 weeks ago in a sterile coffee shop conversation that had felt less like a breakup and more like a corporate downsizing. "What?" Tessa's voice was barely a whisper. "Now, Tessa," Eleanor said quickly, her tone shifting to one of gentle admonishment. "It's been over a month, 30 days, as if 5 years could be scrubbed clean in 4 weeks. You're dating Ethan?" Tessa looked at Amelia, who suddenly couldn't meet her gaze, choosing instead to inspect her immaculate cuticles. "We just connected," Amelia offered, her voice small. "After you two, well, he was so lost, Tess. He needed someone, and that someone had to be you?" The words were out before Tessa could stop them, sharp and raw. "Tessa, that's enough," Richard snapped. "The relationship ended. Ethan is a fine young man, ambitious, from a good family. We're thrilled that he's staying, connected to us. Amelia has made a very successful match." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating as the smell of old money and potpourri. Amelia was the success, which meant Tessa, the older sister who had moved downtown into a modest apartment and worked the front desk of a boutique hotel instead of joining the family's foundation circuit, was the failure. "He was my boyfriend for 5 years, Tessa repeated, the humiliation starting to burn hot in her chest, flushing her neck. "I thought I was going to marry him." "People break up, Tessa. It's life," Eleanor said, brushing a non-existent crumb from the tablecloth. "What's important now is that you're supportive. We won't have this bitterness ruining things for your sister." Tessa looked at the three of them, her father, already discussing Ethan's golf handicap, her mother smiling approvingly, her sister shyly triumphant. Her family had traded her in for the newer model. She stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I have to go." "Tessa, don't be dramatic," her mother started. "I have an early shift." It was a lie, but it was the only armor she had. She fled the dining room, the sound of her father's heavy sigh following her out. She didn't just avoid social gatherings after that. She avoided life. She took every overtime shift the Chamberlain offered, welcoming the exhaustion that fogged her mind. Her small apartment, once a symbol of her independence, now felt like a bunker. She'd turn off her phone, ignoring the cascade of texts from pitying friends and, worse, the group messages from her family planning Amelia's official welcome for Ethan. Her life shrank to the dimensions of the hotel lobby, the smell of industrial cleaner, and the forced politeness she offered to guests. One Tuesday night, near midnight, the dam broke. A guest, a woman dripping in diamonds and disdain, had been screaming at her for 10 minutes because the thread count of the penthouse sheets was, apparently, an insult to her skin. Tessa had apologized, offered complimentary champagne, and finally offered a full refund, all while the woman sneered. You look like you're about to cry. Can't you get someone competent?" When the woman finally swept toward the elevator, Tessa fled. She ducked into the staff hallway, a concrete tunnel painted a sterile, peeling beige. The air smelled like bleach and hot machinery from the laundry room. She leaned her forehead against the cool, rough wall, and the tears she had refused to shed at the dinner table finally came. They weren't loud, dramatic sobs. They were silent, scalding tears of humiliation. She was 27 years old, a pariah in her own family, and she couldn't even handle a rude guest. Ethan's voice echoed in her head, his parting shot in that coffee shop. "I just need someone stronger. Tess, someone who's going places." She slid down the wall, burying her face in her hands, trying to muffle the sounds of her own breaking. She didn't know how long she sat there before a shift in the air made her look up. A man was standing at the far end of the hallway, near the service elevator exit. He was tall, dressed in an immaculate dark suit, but with no tie, the collar of his white shirt unbuttoned. He wasn't hotel security. He was perfectly still, watching her. There was no pity in his expression, only a quiet, unnerving intensity. He wasn't looking at her like a man looks at a woman. He was looking at her like a jeweler inspecting a flawed diamond. Tessa scrambled to her feet, wiping her face, her professionalism kicking in even through the shame. "Sir, I'm sorry, this area is for staff only." His face was all shadows and sharp angles, his dark hair cut close. He didn't move. He just held her gaze. It felt like he was cataloging every weakness, every crack in her composure. "Are you lost?" she tried again, her voice stronger, though her hands were shaking. The service elevator dinged, the door sliding open without a word. The man turned, stepped inside, and was gone. Tessa's heart hammered against her ribs. It wasn't the encounter that scared her. It was his stillness, the absolute predatory silence of his observation. The next night, the lobby was quiet. She was rearranging reservation folios when a low voice startled her. "They shouldn't speak to you that way." She looked up. It was him, the man from the hallway. He was leaning on the marble front desk, his presence sucking all the air out of the grand lobby. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His suit was clearly custom, fitting his broad shoulders perfectly. His eyes, she saw now, were the color of dark roast coffee, and they missed nothing. "Excuse me," Tessa said, her spine stiffening. "The woman last night," he clarified. His voice was a low rumble, laced with an accent she couldn't quite place. Maybe Italian, maybe just old New York. "The one who humiliated you." Tessa's face flushed. "I was having a bad night. It's part of the job." "It's part of a bad job," he countered. His gaze unwavering, he pushed a small, heavy stock card across the marble. It was black, with a name embossed in simple, severe silver. Dante Russo. The name meant nothing to her. "And what do you do, Mr. Russo?" she asked. Her tone clipped. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm in the import-export business." It was the vaguest, most cliched answer she'd ever heard. "You have a fire in you," he said. Ignoring her skeptical look, he was studying her face again. "Even when you're trying to put it out. I saw it last night." "I don't know what you're talking about, Tessa said, turning back to her computer. A clear dismissal. He didn't leave. He lingered, his presence a heavy weight. Most people shatter, you just cracked. And then you came back to work. Why? His question was so direct, so personal. It disarmed her. "Because I have bills to pay. Because I'm not a child. Because I have to—" "Tessa," he said. And the way he spoke her name, not like a question, but like a statement, sent a strange shiver through her. "I'm in suite 405. If they give you any more trouble, I can handle myself. Mr. Russo, I know." He finally pushed away from the desk. "But you shouldn't have to." She watched him walk to the elevator, his stride smooth and confident. He didn't look back. Tessa was left rattled, a strange mix of suspicious and, deep down, embarrassingly intrigued. No one had ever spoken to her with that kind of quiet, absolute certainty. The final blow came 2 days later. Tessa was on her lunch break, scrolling mindlessly through her phone, when an image stopped her cold. It was on the City Register, the local elite gossip blog. The photograph was of Ethan and Amelia, clinking champagne glasses on a yacht. Amelia's left hand was prominently displayed, a diamond the size of a small iceberg flashing on her finger. Ethan was grinning, his arm wrapped possessively around Amelia's waist. The headline, Ethan Vale and Amelia Marano, the engagement we all saw coming. Tessa's stomach revolted. The caption underneath was worse. Sources say the Marano family is overjoyed that Ethan has chosen the right sister, calling Amelia the upgrade. The comments were a sea of vipers. Tessa always looked so plain next to him. Good riddance. Amelia is the real prize. I heard Tessa had a breakdown. So embarrassing. Tessa ran to the staff bathroom, locking herself in a stall as the nausea and shame flooded her. It was public. Her humiliation was now fodder for the entire city. Her 5-year relationship wasn't just over. It had been rewritten as a prelude to the real story. She was the rough draft, and Amelia was the polished, final manuscript. She spent the rest of her shift in a fog of numb misery. She was a ghost, checking in guests, smiling and dying inside. She felt his eyes on her before she saw him. Dante Russo was standing near the grand staircase, ostensibly reading a newspaper, but his gaze was fixed on the front desk, on her. He was on his phone, and as he glanced up, she saw the screen. He was looking at the same City Register article. He was reading about her. He snapped the phone shut, his expression unreadable, and walked toward her. He moved like a panther, silent and deliberate, parting the sparse evening crowd in the lobby without a gesture. He stopped at the desk. He didn't offer pleasantries. "Is that the man?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. Tessa gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles white. "I don't have any vacancies on the penthouse floor. Mr. Russo, don't lie to me, Tessa. It's an insult." His eyes bored into hers. "He's the reason you were crying in the hallway. It's none of your business," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're right," he agreed, which surprised her. "It's not, but I hate cowards, and I hate bullies." "He's not a bully," she said, a pathetic defense of a man who had just publicly destroyed her. We wanted different things. He wanted a trophy," Dante said, his voice flat, "and you wanted a heart." "A bad trade." Tessa had no reply. She just stared at him, stunned by his accuracy. He studied her for another long moment, as if making a decision. Then he nodded once, a curt, definitive gesture. "Good night, Tessa." He turned and left the hotel. At 11, when her shift ended, she was gathering her coat when the night auditor, Maria, called her over. "This was left for you, honey, from the guest in 405. He checked out." On the counter sat a single, perfect, long-stemmed red rose. The petals were a deep, velvety crimson, so dark they were almost black at the edges. Tucked into the stem was a small, heavy stock card. Tessa picked it up. His handwriting was stark and angular, all sharp lines and intent. It didn't say, "I'm sorry for your loss," or "Hope you feel better." It said, "They'll regret losing you. He already does." Dante Russo's note felt like a burn in her pocket. "They'll regret losing you. He already does." Tessa had read it perhaps 100 times. Standing in the stark light of her apartment kitchen, it was absurd. A man she didn't know, a guest, leaving such a cryptic, possessive message. She'd tucked the note and the single, impossibly dark rose, now wilting in a water glass, into a drawer, out of sight, but not out of mind. His words had planted a seed of defiance, a tiny, fragile thing she was too afraid to water, so she continued to hide. That's where her best friend, Chloe, found her 2 weeks later, on a Saturday, buried under a quilt on her sofa, pretending the world outside her windows didn't exist. Chloe, a whirlwind of vibrant red hair and sharp opinions, didn't bother knocking. She used her emergency key and let herself in, the scent of expensive perfume and righteous indignation filling the stale air. "Absolutely not," Chloe announced, marching over and ripping the curtains open. Tessa groaned as sunlight, the enemy, flooded the room. "Go away, I'm diseased." "You're wallowing." which is a disease of the spirit, and I'm the cure. Chloe kicked a pile of mail on the floor. Get up, you're going to the foundation gala. Tessa laughed. A dry, rusty sound. That's hilarious. I'm not going anywhere, especially not there. They'll be there. Chloe, my family, Ethan, her... I know. Chloe crossed her arms. That's the entire point. You cannot let those vipers win by default. You can't let them erase you. Tess, you hide now. You'll be hiding for the rest of your life. You have to go. You have to stand there. Look gorgeous and show them you are not broken. But I am broken. Tessa's voice cracked, the confession hanging in the dusty air. They broke me. He broke me. And the whole city laughed about it. So we glue you back together, put some glitter in the cracks, and shove you onto the dance floor, Chloe said, her voice softening just a fraction. I got you a ticket. It's on my table. You're going... Even if I have to duct tape you into a dress. Tessa looked at her friend, this fierce, loyal woman who had been her only anchor. The thought of the gala, the whispers, the pitying looks, Ethan's smug face, Amelia's triumph, it all made her want to vomit. Reclaim your confidence. Tess, Chloe pleaded, grabbing her hands. One night, for me. For you. Reluctance was too small a word for what Tessa felt. It was a bone-deep dread. But the alternative, staying in this apartment until she fused with the sofa, felt like a different kind of death. She finally gave a small, miserable nod. The ballroom at the Regent was a sea of crystal and manufactured smiles. Tessa felt less like a guest and more like an impala who had accidentally wandered into a lion's den. She wore the only formal dress she owned, a simple, midnight blue silk slip that she'd bought for a New Year's party with Ethan 2 years ago. It felt like a costume from another life. She clutched a glass of champagne, her knuckles white, and tried to blend into a potted ficus. Tessa? Tessa Morano? She turned. A woman she vaguely recognized from her mother's charity committee was staring at her, eyes wide with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I just heard about Ethan and Amelia, the woman whispered, leaning in conspiratorially. How awful for you. Still, to lose him to your own sister. Tessa's face burned. Excuse me, she muttered, and fled toward the terrace, her escape blocked by a cluster of men in tuxedos. She stopped, trying to navigate around them, when she heard the name. Russo is here, a man with a silver crew cut was saying, his voice low and nervous. Can you believe it? They let Dante Russo in the front door. He donated $500,000 to the children's wing. Senator, another man replied, wiping his brow. For that price, they'd let in the devil himself. He might as well be, the senator muttered. The man owns the docks. And half the politicians on the East Coast? Stay away from him. George, he's not just connected. He is the connection. Tessa's blood ran cold. Russo. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on a quiet alcove near the orchestra. It was him. Dante Russo. He wasn't the vaguely intimidating guest from the hotel. This man was a different creature entirely. He was flanked by 2 men so large they seemed to block out the light, their suits bulging in all the wrong places. He was speaking to the mayor, who was nodding, smiling a stiff, terrified smile. Dante was the center of a vortex of fear and respect. He looked up then, as if sensing her stare. His gaze cut through the crowd, ignoring the senator, the mayor, the music. He found her. His eyes locked on hers, and for a heart-stopping second, the entire noisy ballroom disappeared. He didn't smile. He just watched her. That same unnerving intensity from the hallway, magnified 1,000 times. He inclined his head, a fractional, silent acknowledgement, a jolt, sharp and unwelcome, shot through her. This was the man from the gossip, the man who owned the docks, the man who left cryptic notes. He was dangerous. He was not, as her father would say, a fine young man. A sudden commotion at the grand entrance snapped her out of the trance. The flashbulbs were popping, a chorus of squeals erupting. Amelia and Ethan had arrived. Amelia was incandescent, wearing a white, crystal-encrusted gown that looked suspiciously like a wedding dress. Her hand was permanently affixed to Ethan's arm, that diamond flashing like a weapon. Ethan looked like the king of his own tiny, arrogant world, lapping up the attention. Tessa turned, trying to melt back toward the potted plant, but it was too late. Amelia had spotted her. "Tessa! Oh my God!" Amelia's voice was a high, saccharine trill that set Tessa's teeth on edge. She dragged Ethan through the crowd, a shark scenting blood. "I'm so glad you came," Amelia cried, pulling Tessa into a cold, papery hug. She smelled like Chanel and Victory. "I was so worried you were, well, you know, hiding." "Amelia," Tessa said, her voice tight. "Ethan?" Ethan looked her up and down, a faint sneer on his perfectly handsome face. "Tessa, brave of you to show up. Still working for tips at that hotel, I hear." The cruelty was so casual, so effortless. It hit her like a slap. This was the man she had loved, the man she had planned a future with. "It's an honest living," Tessa said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. Right. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks. "Amelia and I are actually thinking of buying it. As a teardown, of course. The location is prime," Amelia giggled. "Oh, Ethan, you're terrible. Don't listen to him, Tess. We're just so happy." She held up her hand, the diamond catching the light. "Isn't it perfect?" Tessa felt the tears welling, hot and shameful. She was going to break. "Right here, in front of everyone. I have to go. I believe my date needs a drink." The voice was a low growl at her ear, rumbling through her. A warm, heavy hand settled on the bare skin of her lower back, possessive and anchoring. Dante Russo was standing beside her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He wasn't looking at Ethan or Amelia. He was looking at Tessa. "Tessa," he said, his voice loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "I apologize for being late." The air crackled. Ethan's smirk evaporated, his face draining of all color. He knew exactly who Dante Russo was. Amelia's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing in confusion. "Your date?" Ethan stammered. Dante's hand slid from her back to her waist, pulling her firmly against his side. It was a gesture of absolute ownership. "Is there a problem?" It wasn't a question. It was a threat, wrapped in polite silk. Ethan, for the first time in his life, looked genuinely terrified. He shook his head, grabbing Amelia's arm. No problem. We were just leaving." Dante watched them scurry away, his expression dark, before turning his attention back to Tessa. She was trembling. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered, mortified but also, confusingly, grateful. "Yes, I did," he said simply. The orchestra began a new song, a slow, languid waltz. He didn't ask. He simply guided her toward the dance floor. They needed to be reminded of what they lost. She was stiff in his arms, a wooden doll. "You're making a scene. Mr. Russo?" "Dante." He pulled her closer, his hand splayed against her back, his other hand engulfing hers. He smelled like expensive wool, clean soap, and something metallic she couldn't name. "And I always make a scene. Relax, Tessa. You're wound so tight you're about to snap. Let me lead." She had no choice. He moved with a fluid, predatory grace, guiding her through the steps as if they'd been dancing together for years. The crowd parted for them, the whispers following them like a physical force. She was aware of every eye in the room, of Amelia's furious stare, of Ethan's pale, shaken face. She was trapped in the lion's mouth, and everyone was watching. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, staring at the knot of his black tie. "I told you, I hate bullies." His lips brushed her temple as he spoke, and her skin erupted in goosebumps. "And that man," he glanced over her head at Ethan, "is the worst kind of coward." He spun her, his hand tightening at her waist, pulling her flush against him. Her breasts pressed against the hard wall of his chest. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart. "You're shaking," he murmured, his breath warm in her ear. "You scare me." He tilted his head, forcing her to meet his gaze. His dark eyes were bottomless. "Good. He should scare you more." The music swelled, and he held her gaze, a silent, intense promise passing between them. He leaned in, his lips almost touching her earlobe, his voice a gravelly whisper that shot straight to her core. "If you were mine," he breathed, "I'd never look at another woman." The song ended. The spell broke. Tessa pulled back, breathless and dizzy. He didn't release her immediately. His hand lingered on her waist as he guided her off the floor, a silent claim in front of the entire room. He walked her to the main entrance, dismissing his bodyguards with a flick of his chin. The silence of the concrete parking garage was a relief after the noise of the gala. Her beat-up sedan looked pathetic next to the gleaming black luxury cars. He stopped her at her car door, but he didn't unlock it. The tension from the ballroom had followed them, thickening in the cool night air. "That was," she started, but she had no words. "That was a warning," he said, his voice flat. He was standing too close. She could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the single, small white scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He was, she realized with a jolt, devastatingly handsome. Not in the polished, curated way Ethan was. Dante was all hard lines and dark shadows. He reached out, his motion so slow she could have stopped him. He brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek, his fingers grazing her skin. It wasn't a soft touch. It was possessive, almost abrasive, and it sent a shock of pure electricity through her. Her breath caught in her throat. His eyes dropped to her mouth. She thought he was going to kiss her. Part of her, the reckless, broken part, wanted him to, but he just held her gaze, his thumb brushing the line of her jaw. "Good night, Tessa." He stepped back, giving her space. She fumbled for her keys, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the door open. She slid into the driver's seat, her heart hammering a frantic, wild rhythm against her ribs. She drove away, not looking back, but she could feel his eyes on her until she turned the corner. The next few days were a blur. Maria, the night auditor, slid a copy of the Post across the counter with her morning coffee. On the front page was a grainy, telephoto shot of her and Dante on the dance floor, his arm around her, her face turned up to his. The headline, "Mafia Don Dante Russo's Mystery Brunette." Tessa felt sick. Mafia Don. The whispers had been true. Her phone buzzed. A text from Amelia. "He's a killer. Tess, guess you finally found your level?" Pathetic. Tessa's hands were shaking. She looked around the hotel lobby, a place that had once been her refuge and now felt like a cage. The other staff members were whispering, looking at her. The manager was avoiding her gaze. She couldn't breathe. This spotlight was infinitely worse. She was no longer just the jilted ex. She was a mobster's new toy. She considered quitting, packing a bag, and disappearing. Running to a city where no one knew the names Morano or Vale or, God help her, Russo. He found her at the end of her shift, as if he knew she was at her breaking point. He was waiting by her car in the staff parking lot, leaning against a black sedan that looked like it could withstand a bomb. "Get in," he said. No greeting. "What? No, I'm not going anywhere with you. Do you see what you've done?" She threw the newspaper at him. It hit his chest and fell to the pavement. He didn't even look at it. "I did what was necessary. You humiliated me. I saved you," he corrected, his voice dangerously calm. "And now you're in the spotlight, which means you're a target. You need to get out of the city." "A target? What are you talking about?" He stepped closer, his shadow engulfing her. "You're with me now, in their eyes. That makes you leverage. That makes you a weakness." "I am not with you." "You need to disappear for a while," he continued, ignoring her protest. "I have a place upstate, a vineyard. It's quiet. No one will find you. You can breathe." A vineyard, space to breathe. It sounded like heaven. It sounded like a trap. "I am not your charity case, Mr. Russo, and I am not your weakness." He studied her. A flicker of something. Was it approval in his dark eyes? "I know what you are, Tessa, and you're right. You're not a charity case." He opened the passenger door. "Come with me. For the weekend, let the air clear. Let them forget." She was so tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of her family. Tired of Ethan. Tired of being Tessa Morano. But running away with a mafia boss? "I can't," she whispered, the refusal weak. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, shutting the car door. "When you change your mind," he said, and drove away, leaving her in the empty, dark parking lot. That night, sleep was a battlefield. She thrashed, tangled in her sheets, the events of the gala playing over and over. But the dream, when it came, was new. She was on the dance floor, but the ballroom was empty. It was just her and Dante. His hand was on her waist, hot through the silk of her dress. He spun her, pulling her back against his chest, his front pressed against her back. His hand slid from her waist, down over the curve of her hip, his grip firm, possessive. "Mine," he whispered, his voice a rough vibration against her skin. His lips didn't touch her mouth. They traced a line of fire from her temple, down her neck, to the sensitive, bare skin of her shoulder. She arched back into him, her hands gripping his, her head falling to the side. Tessa woke with a sharp gasp, her heart pounding. The room was dark. The sheets were twisted around her legs, and her skin was tingling where his dream lips had been. She was breathless, and her refusal suddenly felt very, very thin. The dream of Dante's hands and lips lingered for days, a phantom heat on her skin. It left Tessa unsettled, torn between a primal fear of the man and an undeniable, electric pull. She was still his mystery brunette in the gossip columns, a status that had made her a pariah at the hotel. Her manager had quietly moved her to back-office accounting, until things blow over. It felt like a demotion. It felt like a cage. She was reconciling invoices, her mind numb, when her phone vibrated on the desk, a private number, a text. "Tess, we need to talk, before the wedding, just to clear the air, for old time's sake. Ethan." Her stomach clenched, a toxic mix of old loyalty and fresh anger. For old time's sake, the audacity of it. After he had publicly branded her the downgrade, she didn't know what to do. Delete it, respond. But a small, stupid part of her, the part that still remembered their first apartment and their 5-year anniversary dinner, craved one last thing: closure. She needed to hear him say, "Why?" She knew she couldn't ask Chloe. Chloe would tell her to set the message on fire. There was only one other person who had involved himself in this mess. She found Dante Russo's name in her contacts, a number she didn't remember adding. He must have put it there that night at the gala, a silent infiltration. She typed out a message, her thumb hovering. This was insane. Texting a mafia boss for relationship advice? Before she could second guess, she forwarded him a screenshot of Ethan's text. Her phone rang less than 10 seconds later. Not a text, a call. She fumbled, dropping it, then picking up. "Hello? Don't go." Dante's voice was a low command, no greeting. I didn't say I was going. You were thinking about it," he stated. "He's a manipulator." "Tessa, he's not looking for closure. He's looking to see if he still has power over you." "You don't know that," she argued, though his words hit a nerve. "Maybe he just feels guilty. Maybe he wants to apologize." A harsh, dry laugh came through the speaker. "Men like him don't feel guilt. Tesoro, they feel inconvenience. He sees you with me. He sees the headlines, and his ego is bruised. He wants to make sure you're still the same broken girl he left. Don't give him the satisfaction. It's my life, Dante. It was 5 years of my life. I need to end this my way." The silence on the other end was heavy, charged with disapproval. "Fine, but you don't go alone." "What are you going to do?" she snapped, suddenly alarmed. "Send your bodyguards? Stand over his table? I'm telling you not to go. Tessa, he's a coward, and cowards are predictable. He's going to hurt you again, just to prove he can." "I have to," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I'll never move on if I don't." He didn't say, "I told you so." He just said, "He's not worth the air you breathe," and the line went dead. She ignored him. She ignored the warning bells in her own head. She agreed to meet Ethan the next day at a crowded, brightly lit cafe downtown. Neutral territory, safe. Ethan was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking tense. He looked, she noted with a pang of detachment, exhausted. Being engaged to Amelia was clearly a high-maintenance job. "Tess," he said. Standing as she approached, he went to hug her. An old, familiar reflex. She sidestepped him and sat down. "What did you want? Ethan?" "Wow. Okay." He sat, drumming his fingers on the table. He was still wearing the watch she'd given him for his 30th birthday. The sight of it was a fresh sting. "You look different." "I'm not." "Oh, come on, Tess. You are. The dress at the gala, the newspapers, this Russo guy? Jesus. Tess, do you have any idea who he is? He's not just rich. He's dangerous." "Is that why you asked me here? To discuss my safety?" "I'm worried about you," he insisted, his voice rising, drawing a look from the next table. "You're getting in over your head. You're naive. You always were." Naive? The word, coming from him, was almost funny. "I wasn't naive, Ethan. I just trusted you." He sighed, leaning forward, deploying the earnest, concerned expression that had always made her fold. "Look, I know you're hurt. I know how it looks with Amelia." "How does it look, Ethan?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "It was complicated. It just happened. But Tess, you and I, we were spinning our wheels. We weren't going anywhere. We were happy. Were we?" He shook his head, a pitying, patronizing look on his face. "I was, but I need more. I'm building an empire. Tess, I need a partner who understands that. Someone who can stand in those rooms, who can play the game. Someone ambitious." And there it was, the final knife. "And I'm not ambitious enough," she stated, the numbness spreading from her chest outward. "You were always happy with the small things," he said, as if it were a fatal flaw. "The hotel job, the tiny apartment, reading books on a Friday night. It's sweet. It's just not what I need. Amelia gets it. She was raised for this life. She's better suited." Better suited. The upgrade. Tessa stared at him. This man, who she had held when his father died, who she had supported when he quit his first job, who knew every secret, every fear she had. He was reducing their 5 years to a bad business fit. "You didn't just want different things. Ethan," she said, her voice hollow, "you betrayed me. With my sister. You humiliated me, and you're still doing it. Right now. I'm trying to be honest." "No," she said, finally finding a sliver of steel in her spine. "You're trying to justify being a monster. You're trying to make sure I know my place, which is beneath you and Amelia. So, congratulations. Message received." She stood up. His face changed from frustration to panic. He hadn't gotten what he wanted. He hadn't won. "Tess, wait," he said, grabbing her wrist. The contact was electric, and it repulsed her. She ripped her arm out of his grasp. "Don't you ever touch me again?" She turned and walked out of the cafe, her head high, her vision blurred. She made it to the sidewalk, sucking in the cold city air, before the first sob threatened to tear her apart. As Ethan walked out of the cafe door, a dark sedan that had been parked across the street glided to the curb, blocking his path. The passenger window slid down. Dante Russo was sitting in the driver's seat, his expression perfectly calm, perfectly lethal. He didn't look at Tessa. His entire terrifying focus was on Ethan. Ethan froze, his face going a sickly, pale white. Dante didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The quiet menace in his tone was enough to stop traffic. "You ever," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, "put your hands on her again, or even breathe her name to another living soul, and I will dismantle your entire, pathetic life, your job, your family, your future. You will have nothing left but the memory of this conversation. Do you understand me?" Ethan, the empire builder, the ambitious man, could only nod, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Dante watched him for another 3 seconds, then turned his gaze to Tessa, who was standing frozen on the sidewalk. His expression softened, just a fraction, but his fury was still there, a banked fire behind his eyes. "Get in the car," he said. It wasn't a request. She walked around and slid into the passenger seat. The car was silent, the leather smelling of money and power. Dante pulled away from the curb, leaving Ethan a trembling statue on the sidewalk. They drove for 5 blocks in complete silence. Tessa stared straight ahead, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap her nails were biting into her palms. She had done exactly what he'd warned her not to do, and he had been proven right in the most humiliating way. She felt the first tear slide down her cheek, then another. Then the dam broke. The humiliation, the betrayal, the final, brutal severing of her past, it all came crashing down. She covered her face with her hands and broke down, not in the quiet, dignified way she had in the staff hallway, but with ragged, gulping sobs that tore from her chest. Dante pulled the car over, slamming it into park in a no-stopping zone. He didn't care. "Tessa, he's right," she choked out, unable to stop the words. "He's right. I am naive. I'm not ambitious. I'm just nothing. I'm the sweet girl, the before girl. I'm disposable. Stop." He unbuckled his seatbelt, turning to face her. His voice was rough. "Stop saying that. But it's true," she cried, finally looking at him, her face a mess of tears and mascara. "My own family thinks so. The whole city thinks so. And he just confirmed it. He's a child playing in his father's suit," Dante said, his voice laced with a fury she realized was entirely on her behalf. "He's weak, so he has to make you weaker. That's not truth. Tessa, that's just noise." He reached out, his hand cupping her jaw. His thumb was rough against her wet skin, wiping away a tear with a strange, possessive gentleness. His touch was so firm, so absolute. It silenced her sobs. "Look at me," he commanded. She did. His dark eyes were burning with an emotion she couldn't name. "You are not naive. You are trusting. That is not a weakness. You are not unambitious. You are decent, and you are not." He leaned in, his forehead pressing against hers. He seemed to be fighting a war within himself. His breath fanned her face. "You are not disposable," he whispered, the words a vow. He held her face in his hands, his gaze locked on hers. Then he pressed a kiss to her forehead. It wasn't a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of sealing, a brand, a promise of protection. He held her there for a long moment, just breathing her in, before he finally pulled back. "I'm taking you home. I don't want to go to my apartment," she said, her voice small. "I can't be alone right now." He nodded, a muscle in his jaw tightening. "Then you'll come to mine." His penthouse was what she expected, and nothing like she expected. It was a fortress of glass and steel, high above the city, with views that stretched into infinity. But it wasn't cold. It was filled with old books, dark wood, and the lingering scent of espresso and, strangely, basil. He poured her a glass of water, his movements economical and precise. He didn't offer her wine. He didn't try to get her drunk. He just watched her as she stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city lights. "Thank you," she said, her voice still rough, "for what you said to him. I meant every word." He came to stand beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his body heat. The tension in the air was so thick it was a living thing. It was the leftover adrenaline from the confrontation, the simmering desire from the dream, the raw vulnerability of her breakdown. She turned to face him. "Why? Why what? Why are you doing this? Why do you care if some coward insults me?" His eyes roamed her face, as if memorizing it. "Because I told you, I hate bullies, and because—" He paused, his voice dropping. "When I first saw you, in that hallway, you were broken, but you weren't defeated. I respect that." He was so close. The space between them was electric, humming with unspoken things. "I don't know what you want from me," she whispered. "I want you to stop letting them define you," he murmured. He lifted his hand, not to her face, but to a strand of her hair, tucking it behind her ear. His fingers brushed her neck, and she shivered. And that was all it took. The simmering tension erupted. He didn't lunge. She didn't fall into him. It was a mutual, magnetic pull. His other hand came up, cupping her face, and his mouth descended on hers. It was not the chaste kiss on the forehead. This was a kiss of hunger, of rage, of possession. It was all the words he hadn't said, all the anger he'd felt on her behalf. His lips were firm, demanding, and she didn't just let him. She met him. She kissed him back with all the pain and fury and desperate need for something that Ethan had just ripped out of her. Her hands came up, grabbing the front of his shirt, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. He groaned, a low, animal sound deep in his chest, and pulled her flush against him. His body was hard, unyielding. He wasn't gentle. He was claiming. His tongue traced her lips, asking for entrance, and she gave it. The kiss deepened, becoming wet and desperate. He tasted like coffee and expensive whiskey and something uniquely, dangerously Dante. One of his hands slid from her face, down her back, settling on her waist and pulling her hips against his. She could feel his arousal, hard against her stomach, and it didn't scare her. It anchored her. It proved that. Despite what Ethan said, she was wanted. He touched her like she mattered. His hands weren't fumbling or disrespectful. They were deliberate. They were mapping her, learning her, staking a claim. He broke the kiss, only to press his mouth to her jaw, to the pulse hammering in her throat. Tessa. He breathed against her skin, and her name from his lips was a prayer and a command. She was dizzy, breathless, clinging to him. He was the most dangerous man she had ever met, and she had never, ever felt safer. He started to back her toward the shadows of the room, toward the sofa, his mouth never leaving her skin. But then, as his hand went to the small of her back, his shirt rode up slightly, her fingers, still tangled in his shirt, brushed against something else. Skin. But not smooth skin. It was ridged, scarred. He flinched. Not in pain, but in reflex. The kiss stopped. He pulled back instantly, his eyes guarded, the passion replaced by a cold, distant look. He turned away from her, running a hand through his hair. "Dante?" she asked, her voice trembling. He stood with his back to her, breathing heavily. "You should go." What was that? Go home? Tessa, this was a mistake." No. She was not the disposable girl, not anymore. She walked up behind him, her courage shaky but present. "Don't turn away from me. Not now." He was rigid. "You don't want to see this. You saw me at my worst, in the hallway, in your car. Now let me see you." He was silent for a long time. Then, slowly, he unbuttoned his cuffs. He pulled his shirt, the one she had been clinging to. Over his head, he turned. His chest and shoulders were powerful, a map of muscle and sinew. But his back was a geography of violence. It wasn't one scar. It was a dozen. Some were thin, white and old, puckered lines that spoke of knives. Others were round, deep divots, but the worst were 3 long, wide, raised scars that looked like, "They're from a fire," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "A long time ago. Payment for my father's debts." She didn't gasp. She didn't recoil. She saw this, the evidence of his violent past, and she wasn't afraid. She just felt a profound, aching sadness. She stepped closer. He didn't move. He stood like a stone, braced for her rejection. Tessa lifted a trembling hand. She didn't speak. She just gently, so gently, traced the largest scar, the one that ran from his left shoulder blade down to his ribs. Her fingers were light, a whisper of a touch. She wasn't judging, she was just learning. She felt him shudder under her touch, a deep, involuntary tremor. He closed his eyes, his head bowing slightly, as if her simple, wordless comfort was a heavier weight than all his armor. She traced another, then another, her touch an offering of peace in a life that had clearly known so much war. He didn't speak. She didn't either, but in the silence, something profound shifted. The desire was still there, a hot coil in her stomach, but it was now threaded with something deeper, understanding. Finally, he captured her hand, lacing his fingers with hers, and brought her palm to his lips, kissing the center of it. "Not like this," he said, his voice rough. "Not when you're raw from him." She just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The next morning, Tessa woke up on the softest couch she had ever known, a heavy cashmere blanket draped over her. She had no memory of falling asleep. Dante was gone, but on the glass coffee table in front of her, there was a tray, a steaming pot of coffee, a fresh croissant, and a single, perfect gardenia floating in a bowl of water. Next to it was a set of fresh clothes, a simple, elegant black sweater and dark jeans, perfectly in her size, and a note on the same heavy cardstock as the one from the hotel. "Whenever you're ready, I'll wait." Walking away from Dante's penthouse that morning, dressed in clothes he had provided, Tessa felt like she was wearing a new skin. The black sweater was impossibly soft, the jeans fitting her better than anything she owned. She felt protected. And that feeling, more than the explosive kiss or the intimacy of his scars, was what terrified her. It was a vulnerability she had never known. She had spent her entire life trying to be what her family wanted, the responsible, quiet, accommodating daughter. Now, she was the mystery brunette of a mafia don. She needed to see them. She needed to sever the final thread of their expectations, or it would strangle her. She took a cab to the opulent, sterile suburban street where she'd grown up. She didn't have a key anymore. She hadn't for years. She rang the bell. Her mother, Eleanor, opened the door, her face a perfect mask of polite surprise that quickly hardened into disapproval. "Tessa, this is a surprise." Eleanor didn't move from the doorway. "We're in the middle of finalizing the seating charts for the wedding. I need to talk to you. And Dad." With a long-suffering sigh, Eleanor stepped aside. "Richard is in the study. I hope you're not here to make things more difficult." The house smelled the same as it always had, of lemon polish and old, dry roses. It was the scent of her childhood, and for the first time. It didn't smell like home. It smelled like a museum. She found them both in the study, her father staring at a spreadsheet, her mother hovering. Eleanor spoke first, holding up a copy of the Post from the gala, her fingers pinching the edge as if it were contaminated. "What is this?" "Tessa." Eleanor's voice was sharp. "A weapon. Dante Russo. Are you out of your mind? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "He was kind to me," Tessa said, her voice quiet, but, to her own surprise, steady. Kind? Her father. Richard finally looked up, his face a thundercloud. "That man is not kind. He's a criminal. He's the son of a killer. He's filth. And you, my daughter, were photographed hanging on his arm like a common." He couldn't even finish the sentence. His disgust was so complete. "He's embarrassing us. Tessa," Eleanor's voice rose, losing its polite veneer. "We have spent 30 years building this family's name, this reputation. Amelia is marrying into one of the most prominent families in this city, and you are stirring trouble, being seen with a thug." Every word was a small, sharp cut. But the girl who had cried in Dante's car wasn't the same girl standing in this room. "You mean I'm embarrassing Amelia?" Tessa stated. "Of course this is about Amelia." Eleanor threw the paper onto the desk. "Her wedding is in 2 weeks. This is the most important event of this family's season. This is about our status, our legacy. It is not about your feelings or your bizarre, rebellious little adventure. You are jeopardizing everything for her." Tessa stared at her mother, and the final piece of her old life clicked, then broke. It had never been about her. She'd never been the point. She was just a supporting character, and now she was a badly behaved one. "He was right," Tessa whispered. "Who was right? That animal?" Richard scoffed. "Ethan," Tessa said, the name tasting like ash. "He said I wasn't ambitious enough. He said Amelia was better suited. He was right. She is. She's just like you." "You will watch your tone," her father warned, standing up. "No," Tessa said, and the simple word hung in the air, heavy and final. She looked at her mother, at the woman who had brushed aside her 5-year heartbreak like a breadcrumb. "He protected me. When Ethan and Amelia humiliated me at the gala, he stood up for me. When I was just the joke, the upgrade's broken sister. He was the one who was kind. You, my family. You just told me to be supportive." She turned, her heart hurting, but not breaking. It was a dull, final ache. "You don't have to worry about me embarrassing you anymore. I'm done." "Tessa, don't you dare walk out of this house," her mother commanded. Tessa walked out. She was in the grand marble-floored foyer, her hand on the heavy brass doorknob, when the front door opened and Amelia walked in, holding a bridal magazine. Amelia stopped, her eyes narrowing when she saw Tessa. "What are you doing here?" "Leaving." Amelia stepped in front of the door, a cold, triumphant smirk on her perfectly glossed lips. "Running back to your gangster, Tess? I heard all about the cafe. Ethan told me how you made a scene. He said you're still completely obsessed with him. It's sad. Move, Amelia. Just remember, Amelia said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. While you're playing in the dirt with men like Russo, I'll be the one walking down the aisle. I'll be the one with the ring, the house, and the man. He's finally with a winner. Tessa looked at her little sister, at the insecurity and spite warring in her eyes, and she didn't feel anger. She just felt pity. You can have him, Tessa said, but you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if he's thinking about me. And he will be. She pushed past her sister and walked out the front door, into the clean, cold air, and for the first time in her life, she didn't look back. Dante's car was waiting at the corner. She hadn't called him. He had just known. He didn't take her to his penthouse. He took her to a different building, a sleek, modern high-rise she didn't recognize. He led her to a private elevator, which opened not into a hallway, but directly into a sprawling, empty apartment. The entire floor was glass, dark marble, and steel, but it was unfurnished, a blank canvas, except for the far side of the room, there, sitting on a massive open-air terrace, was a single table set for two. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice small, as he guided her outside. The city glittered below them like a carpet of fallen stars. "A project," he said, pulling out her chair. "It's not finished." There was no waitstaff, no bodyguards, just them, a bottle of deep red wine, and plates of pasta he had clearly brought himself. The silence was intimate, broken only by the distant sound of city traffic. "You went to see them," he stated. Tessa nodded, twisting her napkin in her lap. "I had to. My mother, she said this wasn't about feelings, it was about status. About Amelia's wedding." Dante didn't seem surprised. He poured her a glass of wine. "And that's why they'll lose. People who trade in feelings will always go bankrupt. People who trade in status just get old." She told him what Amelia had said. "She called me pathetic. She said she's the winner." Dante set his glass down. His eyes were dark, but not with anger. With something else. Something heavy. "I want to tell you something," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Something I don't talk about. I want you to know why I am what I am." He looked out at the city, but she knew he was seeing something else entirely. "I had a sister, Eliana. She was like you, all fire and trust. She married a man my father approved of, a connected man. Good family, good status." He paused, and the muscle in his jaw clenched. He was a monster. He had a sickness in him. He liked to hurt things that were smaller than him. And she was loyal. She kept his secrets. She protected him, right up until the end. "What happened?" Tessa whispered, her heart aching. "By the time I found out what he was doing," Dante's voice was rough, like gravel. "By the time I had the power to do anything about it, it was too late. I lost her. I lost her to abuse, to silence, and to status." He turned his gaze back to her, and the intensity of it was a physical blow. "I took over my father's organization 2 weeks later. The man who hurt her, he was the first debt I collected. I see that monster, Tessa. I see him in men like your ex-fiancé, who need to break something beautiful to feel strong. I see him in your family, who would rather protect a reputation than a daughter. And I will never, ever let that happen again. Not on my watch, not to you." Tessa's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't for herself. They were for him, for the man who had turned his own profound, violent grief into a shield. He watched her, his expression raw. "I'm not a good man, Tessa. I've done things in the name of that promise that would make you sick, but I'm honest, and what I told you at the hotel is the truth. I see the fire in you, and I will not let them put it out." She reached across the table, her hand covering his. His skin was warm. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She didn't say, "Thank you." She just said, "You're not like them." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. They finished dinner in a comfortable silence, the unspoken truth of his past settling between them, not as a barrier, but as a bridge. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. He led her not to the elevator, but to a dark, spiral staircase she hadn't noticed. It led up. "Where are we going?" "The roof," he said. The roof was a garden, a secret oasis of olive trees and lavender in the middle of the concrete sky. The air was cool, and she shivered. Dante didn't offer her his coat. He simply stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He was a furnace. His chin rested on her shoulder. His arms crossed over her stomach, holding her. "Dante," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Stay with me tonight," he murmured, his breath warm in her ear. She stiffened, her mind immediately going to the implications. He seemed to sense it. He tightened his grip, his voice rough with an emotion she didn't recognize. "Not just for that. Not unless you want to." He buried his face in her hair, his voice muffled. "Tessa, I don't sleep. I haven't slept. Really, in 10 years. Not since Eliana." He turned her in his arms, his face etched with a vulnerability that shattered her. "But that night, in the penthouse, when you fell asleep on the sofa, I slept. For 3 hours. In the chair across from you, I sleep better when you're near." It was the most honest, most desperate, most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her. It was not a proposition. It was a confession. "Yes," she said, her voice clear. "I'll stay." He didn't take her back to the penthouse. This was their sanctuary. He led her back downstairs to a room she hadn't seen, one with a simple bed and a wall of glass looking out at the stars. The tension was back, but it was different. It wasn't the desperate collision of part 3. It was a slow, deliberate choice. He touched her face, his thumb tracing her jaw. "You are magnificent, tesoro." She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was a soft kiss, a question. He answered by deepening it, his hands moving from her face to her shoulders, then to her waist. He undressed her slowly, reverently, his eyes worshipping every inch of her. He wasn't looking at her like a man looks at a body. He was looking at her like she was the answer to a question he'd forgotten he'd asked. When she stood before him, bare in the starlight, she didn't feel shame or fear. She felt powerful. She reached for him, her hands unbuttoning his shirt, pushing it off his shoulders. She didn't flinch at his scars. This time, she kissed them. She felt him shudder, a low groan rumbling in his chest. He lifted her then, as if she weighed nothing, and carried her to the bed. They made love. It was not the fumbling, polite, or selfish experiences of her past. It was tender, and it was fierce. It was his lips against her skin, a trail of fire that made her whole body light up. It was his voice in her ear, low and rough, telling her she was beautiful, telling her she was his. It was her hands, gripping his shoulders like an anchor, holding him to her, keeping him from drifting into the darkness of his past. He was anchoring her in a new, terrifying, exhilarating present. It was a collision of two solitudes, a violent, beautiful merging. He moved inside her with a reverence that felt like worship, a desperation that felt like a homecoming. He was claiming her, and in return, she was quieting the storm in him, afterward, long after. She lay curled into his chest, her head over his heart, their limbs tangled, the sheets a mess. The city lights were dimming, the sky turning a deep, pre-dawn purple. She was peaceful, but the last demon had to be exorcised. "Dante?" she whispered. "I'm here. I'm afraid," she confessed, her voice small in the quiet room. "I'm afraid that people will always see me as the girl who lost, that they'll always compare me to Amelia." She turned her head, looking up at his shadowed face. "She's the winner. She's better suited. How do I ever stop being the one who wasn't enough?" Dante was silent for a moment, then he shifted, propping himself up on one elbow, forcing her to look him in the eye. His gaze was so intense, so absolute. It burned away all her doubt. "I don't compare you," he said, his voice a raw vow. He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb. "I choose you." The next day, the peace was shattered. Tessa woke up alone in the bed, the scent of him on the pillows, the indentation of his body still next to hers. She found him in the main room, dressed, on the phone. He wasn't the tender lover from the night before. He was the Dawn. His back was to her, his posture rigid, his voice speaking in low, rapid Italian. "Find him. Nico." He snapped into the phone. "I want his eyes. I want his hands. I want him to know what happens when he touches what is mine." He hung up, slamming the phone onto the marble counter with a crack. "Dante?" Tessa said, her voice wary. "What is it? What's wrong?" He turned, and his face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. "It's nothing. A business matter." "Don't lie to me," she said, pulling on the robe he'd left for her. "Not after last night." He looked at her, and his mask cracked. He ran a hand through his hair, a deep sigh racking his body. "An old rival, a man named Vitali. He doesn't like my new distraction." He held up his phone. On the screen was a picture. It was of her, walking out of her apartment yesterday. A grainy telephoto shot with a crosshair crudely drawn over her chest. "He thinks you're my weakness," Dante said, his voice flat, but his eyes were pure fire. "He thinks he can use you to damage me, to make me unstable. He just sent this to my consigliere, a threat." He met with his consigliere, Nico. An hour later, Tessa sat in the other room, but she could hear the steel in Dante's voice. "She is not to be touched," Dante said, his voice quiet, which was far more terrifying than a shout. "This animal, Vitale, he's made a mistake. He thinks she is a liability. He's wrong." Nico said something in Italian. "No," Dante replied. "You will not move her. I will not hide her. You will find him. You will put a team on her. But she is not to feel like a prisoner. And you will handle Vitale. Make him understand she's not my weakness. She's my reason." The wedding invitation had arrived 3 days ago, delivered by a fuming courier to Dante's penthouse. It was an act of supreme malice on Amelia's part, sending the thick, embossed cardstock not to Tessa's defunct apartment, but to the one place in the city she knew Tessa was staying. It was a taunt, a reminder, and a command performance. The week of the wedding arrived like a sentence, each day a tick closer to her execution. Tessa was a ghost in Dante's fortress, pacing the glass walls, the invitation sitting on the marble kitchen island like a bomb. To go was to face the whispers, the pity, the triumphant smirk on her sister's face, and the man who had discarded her. It was to sit in a pew and watch her past be rewritten and celebrated. To stay home, however, was to surrender. It was to admit defeat, to let Amelia and her mother be right. It was to let them win by default, to confirm that she was broken, hiding and pathetic. She was torn, a raw, gaping wound of indecision. Dante had been a shadow all week. His focus divided. She knew he was handling the threat from Vitale. She'd seen the black cars parked across the street, the new, polite bodyguard who now stood in the lobby of the building. She'd heard the low, guttural Italian from his study, the sound of a man giving orders that left no room for negotiation. Yet, he never let that darkness touch her. He came to her in the evenings, sat with her on the terrace, and simply was. He didn't ask her about the wedding, he just waited. On the eve of the ceremony, she was standing barefoot on the cold marble, staring at the invitation. When he finally spoke, "Are you going?" he asked from the shadows of the doorway. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice tight. "I don't know how can I sit there and watch that? It's a humiliation." He moved to stand beside her, his presence a solid, warm wall. He looked down at the invitation, his expression unreadable. "If you go for them, it is a humiliation." He agreed, his voice a low rumble. "If you go, expecting an apology, or hoping he'll look at you with regret, you will be disappointed. That is not why you go." "Then why?" she asked, turning to him, desperate for an answer. "Why would I put myself through that?" He turned, cupping her face, his thumbs brushing the anxious lines on her brow. His dark eyes were deadly serious. "You don't go for them. You don't go for him. You go for you. You go to reclaim the power they took from you. You go to show them, and more importantly, to show yourself, that you are not the girl he left. You are the woman who survived." He searched her face, his gaze stripping away all her defenses. "This is not about revenge. Tessa, Revenge is a child's game. This is about closure. You walk into that church, you hold your head high, and you let them see that they have no more power over you. You are not their victim. I don't know if I'm that strong, she confessed, her voice shaking. You are, he said, his voice absolute. You are the strongest person I know. You just haven't been given a reason to fight. So, you go. You walk in there like you own the place. He gave her a small, fierce smile. And I'll be right behind you. The day of the wedding was a spectacle of white and gold, a blizzard of poor taste and old money. The church was overflowing with peonies and Marano family acquaintances, a sea of pastel suits and wide-brimmed hats. Tessa did not arrive in a pastel. She had spent the morning in a suite at a hotel Dante had booked for her, not as a guest, but as a warrior preparing for battle. When she was ready, she looked in the mirror, and the woman staring back was not the one who had cried in the staff hallway. The dress was not a dress. It was armor. It was a column of black satin that clung to every curve, sleeveless, with a high, elegant neck and a back that was cut daringly low. It was the color of a starless night, of a promise, of an ending. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, glossy knot. Her only jewelry was a pair of small, sharp diamond earrings, a gift from Dante, left on her pillow that morning. She wore no other adornments. She was the antithesis of the wedding, a slash of midnight in their world of bridal white. When she walked into the church 5 minutes before the ceremony, the whispering stopped. It didn't just quiet, it died, sucked into a vacuum of shock. Every head turned. She heard the collective, sharp intake of breath. She didn't look at the guests. She didn't look at her mother's horrified face in the front pew. She kept her eyes forward, her steps silent and deliberate on the stone aisle, and slid into the last row. She felt more than saw Ethan's reaction. He was standing at the altar, looking smug and nervous. As the wave of silence hit him, his head turned. His eyes found her. He froze. It was not just a pause. It was a complete cessation of movement. His smile evaporated. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a sick, pale greenish tint. His gaze locked on her, and in that one, shattering moment, she saw it. Dante was right. He already regretted it. She held his gaze for 3 long, agonizing seconds, and then she deliberately, coolly, looked away, as if he were nothing, a stranger. She turned her attention to the stained glass window, her heart hammering, her blood singing with a terrible, exhilarating power. She had won. The ceremony hadn't even started, and she had already won. The reception was worse. A grand, opulent affair at the city's most exclusive country club. Tessa had a single glass of champagne and stood by a pillar, an island of black in a sea of celebratory ivory. She had done what she came to do. She had shown her face. Now, she just had to endure. She felt the shift in the room before she saw him. The volume of the orchestra dipped. The laughter from the bar area became strained, then stopped. A new, palpable energy was rolling through the room, a wave of fear and profound respect. Dante Russo had arrived. He was late. He was alone. And he was magnificent. He wore a black suit that was so perfectly tailored it looked less like clothing and more like a second, more dangerous skin. He moved through the crowd, and it parted for him like the Red Sea. He ignored the fawning politicians, the terrified bankers, and the whispers of mafia and killer that followed him. His eyes scanned the room for less than a second before they found her. He walked directly to her, his stride smooth and possessive. He didn't care that they were at the wedding of her ex. He didn't care that her entire family was watching, their faces a mask of horror. He stopped in front of her, his gaze so intense it burned. He didn't say hello. He simply lifted a hand, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Sei bellissima," he murmured, his voice too low for anyone else to hear. "You are beautiful." Then, he leaned in front of the entire, silent, scandalized room, he pressed a kiss to her cheek. It was not a polite, social gesture. It lingered. His lips were warm, his control absolute. He was branding her. He was claiming her. He was telling every person in that room that this woman, the one they had dismissed, was his. He pulled back, his hand sliding to the small of her back. "I believe I promised you a dance," he said, his voice now carrying. "They're not," Tessa started, flustered. "They will," he said. But before he could lead her away, a voice, tight with alcohol and fury, cut through the air. "Tessa." She turned. Ethan was standing there, his face flushed, his tie loosened. Amelia was nowhere to be seen. "What do you think you're doing?" Ethan hissed, his eyes flicking nervously from Tessa to Dante. "I was just congratulating the groom," Dante said, his voice dangerously smooth. "Stay away from her," Ethan snapped, emboldened by champagne. "And you," he spat at Tessa. "Are you really doing this? Are you seriously involved with a man like that? A criminal? My God, Tessa, I knew you were naive, but this is pathetic. What, did you do it just to make me jealous?" Tessa looked at the man she had once loved, the man who'd shattered her, and she felt nothing. No anger, no pain, only a vast, empty pity. She stepped away from Dante's protective hold, a single, deliberate step. "He treats me like I matter, Ethan," she said, her voice clear and carrying, silencing the whispers around them. "You never did." Ethan's face went from red to white. He had no answer. He looked as if she had physically struck him. It was, of course, the perfect moment for Amelia to appear. She had seen the confrontation, her face a mask of bridal fury. "What is going on here?" she demanded, her voice a shrill shriek. "Ethan, darling, don't waste your breath on her." She turned to Tessa, her eyes filled with pure, unadulterated venom. "This is my day. Tessa, my day. You really had to come here, dressed like a funeral, and try to steal my husband? You are so desperate. You lost. Get over it." She was loud. The entire room was watching. This was the final humiliation she had planned. Tessa braced for the blow. It never came. Dante moved. He didn't touch Amelia. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped between the two sisters, a wall of silent, cold fury. He was a full foot taller than Amelia, and he looked at her, not as a woman, but as an inconvenience. He looked from her to Ethan, his gaze flat and cold. "Your husband," Dante said, his voice calm, but it sliced through the room like a razor. "Already regrets losing her. I guarantee it." The silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. Amelia's mouth opened, then snapped shut. Ethan looked like he was going to be physically ill. Dante turned his back on them, a gesture of supreme, final dismissal. He held out his hand to Tessa. "I believe you needed some air," he said. Tessa looked at her sister, her ex, and the entire, stunned crowd. She placed her hand in Dante's. He didn't rush. He led her out of the ballroom, through the grand foyer, and out onto the moonlit terrace. He didn't stop until they were at the far end, overlooking the golf course, the scent of cut grass and night-blooming jasmine in the air. The music from the party was a faint, pathetic thrum behind them. Tessa was trembling, not from fear, from adrenaline, from release. "You're shaking," he said, his voice gentle now. "That was," she breathed, "intense. That was closure," he corrected. He turned her to face him, his hands warm on her arms. He studied her face in the pale moonlight, his expression unreadable. "Dante," she started, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Thank you for everything, for seeing me." "Tessa," he said, his voice rough, "I haven't just been seeing you. I've been waiting." "Waiting for what?" He looked at her, and his mask of control, the one he wore for the world, seemed to crack. She saw the man from his penthouse, the one with the scars, the one who slept better when she was near. "This was not," he began, his voice hoarse. "How I planned this? I am a man who plans. I had a speech. I had a different place. But I'm looking at you, in this dress, in this moonlight, and you have just burned your entire past to the ground. And I find I'm not a patient man." She looked at him, confused. "What are you saying?" He let go of her arms, and his hand went into the pocket of his suit jacket. And then, Dante Russo, the Don of the city, the man who made senators tremble, dropped to one knee. He knelt before her, on the cold stone of the terrace. Tessa's hand flew to her mouth, a sharp, choked gasp escaping. Dante. He looked up at her, not with arrogance, not with power, but with a raw, terrifying vulnerability that matched her own. He held out a small, black velvet box. Inside. It wasn't a diamond, it was a flawless, deep blue sapphire, the color of the midnight sky, flanked by two perfect, severe diamonds. "Marry me," he said, his voice a gravelly, desperate command. Not tomorrow, not next year, now, tonight. Tessa was stunned, the tears she had refused to shed all night finally blurring her vision. Dante, what? Is this? This is because of them? Is this to make a statement? No, he said, his voice fierce, cutting her off. He captured her hand, the one that wasn't covering her mouth, and his grip was tight, anchoring. I don't give a damn about them. This is not to make a statement. He looked into her eyes, and she saw his entire soul. I am asking you to marry me, Tessa Morano, because I see the woman you really are, the one who cried in the hallway and came back to work, the one who traced my scars and didn't flinch, the one who walked into that church tonight with more courage than any man I've ever known. I don't want to just protect you. I want to deserve you. He paused, his voice cracking. Just once. I choose you. Tessa, choose me. The tears were streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness or humiliation. They were tears of release, of joy, of being. For the first time in her entire life, truly and completely seen. She was not the upgrade. She was not the consolation prize. She was the choice. Yes, she whispered, the words stolen by the wind. She cleared her throat, her hand gripping his. Yes. A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face, a smile that lit up the darkness and chased away every shadow. He stood, sliding the heavy, cold ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He didn't say anything else. He just pulled her to him, his hand tangling in her hair, and his mouth came down on hers. It wasn't the chaste, possessive kiss from the ballroom. This was a kiss of promise. It was the kiss of a king who had found his queen. It was the kiss of a man who had been in the dark for a decade and had finally found his light. He kissed her, and the sound of the pathetic party, the memory of her family, and the ghost of Ethan Vale, all of it, finally, burned away to nothing. The news of the proposal did not just spread, it detonated. By the next morning, it was not just local gossip, it was a national headline. Mafia Don proposes at rival's wedding. The story had everything: old money, a jilted lover, a family betrayal, and the city's most enigmatic and dangerous man. Photos from the gala, Dante and Tessa dancing, were plastered next to blurry, long lens shots from the country club terrace, capturing the exact moment Dante Russo was on one knee. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. For Tessa's family, it was a social apocalypse. Her parents, Richard and Eleanor, went from being the proud hosts of the season's biggest wedding to the humiliated parents of the mobsters' mall. Their phones rang off the hook, not with congratulations, but with the gleeful, pitying calls of their entire social circle. They were horrified, not by Dante's reputation, but by the sheer, unadulterated tackiness of the scandal. Amelia's honeymoon, a multi-week, brag-worthy tour of the European capitals, was indefinitely delayed. She had, according to the gossip columns, taken to her bed, spiraling into a bridal rage that their new moneyed life was now forever tainted by her sister's underworld drama. And Ethan simply vanished. He avoided the media, his office, and, according to rumors, his new wife. The man who had been so desperate to build an empire had become a ghost in his own story, a footnote in the saga of the woman he'd thrown away. Tessa saw none of this. She was in a bubble, a fortress of glass and steel high above the city. She had moved into Dante's penthouse, leaving behind her tiny apartment and the last remnants of her old, small life. The black satin dress was hung in a closet that was now, shockingly, half hers. Their lives began to blend, not with a clash, but with the quiet, inevitable flow of two rivers merging. It was in the small, domestic details. It was the scent of his espresso, dark and rich, filling the kitchen at sunrise, and her learning to make it exactly the way he liked it, her hands over his on the machine. It was the discovery that he was a terrible sleeper, as he'd confessed, and that he would read 1,000-page history tomes in the living room until 3 a.m, unless she was there, curled against his side, her steady breathing anchoring him to the present. Their nights were spent on the balcony, wrapped in a single cashmere blanket, the city lights a distant, silent audience. They talked, not about his business or her past, but about everything in between. His love for old cinema, her secret desire to open a small bookstore, and the passion that had exploded between them in the empty apartment now settled into a deep, simmering heat. It was no longer the desperate collision of two broken people. It was the deliberate, intimate exploration of two souls who had chosen each other. It was heated kisses in the kitchen while pasta boiled over, his hands sliding from her waist to her hips, pulling her against him. It was long, slow, lazy mornings in his massive bed, the sunlight streaming in, their limbs tangled, his lips tracing her collarbone as he relearned her body, and she, his. He touched her with a reverence that still stunned her, as if she were a priceless work of art, and in his arms, under his gaze, she finally believed it. But the world outside the fortress was still spinning, and Dante's world was a dangerous one. The threat from Vitale, the rival who had called her a weakness, was not an idle one. The proof came a week after the wedding. Tessa, who had officially resigned from the hotel, had gone back to her old apartment to clear out the last of her belongings. She had insisted on going alone, a small, stubborn act of independence. Nico, Dante's ever-present consigliere, had insisted on 2 guards waiting by the car. As she was carrying the last box of her books, she found it, taped to the inside of her apartment door, where a delivery person could have easily left it, was a plain white envelope. Her name was not on it. Inside was not a note. It was a single, dead, pressed rose, its petals a brittle, ugly brown, a mockery of the dark, vibrant one Dante had left for her. She dropped the box, her books scattered across the floor. When Dante arrived, and he was there in less than 10 minutes, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury, he didn't say a word. He just looked at the dead flower in her trembling hand, then at the 2 guards by the car. His eyes so full of black rage it was a miracle they were still standing. He took the flower from her, his touch surprisingly gentle, and handed it to Nico. That night, back in the penthouse, he apologized. He was standing by the window, the city lights reflecting in the glass, but his gaze was on her. "This is my fault. Dante, no." "Yes," he insisted, his voice rough. He turned to her, his face etched with a self-loathing she had never seen. "This is the world I live in. This is the filth I've tried to keep you from. I put you in the spotlight. I made you a target. That flower, that was not just a threat. That was a promise. From a man who knows I'll see it. He sent it to your home. He's telling me he can touch you." "He didn't touch me," Tessa said, walking toward him, her voice firm. "He won't." Dante's voice was flat. "I've doubled security. You're not to leave the penthouse without me. The hotel. Your old apartment, they're off limits. You're removed from public life, temporarily. You are safe. I will keep you safe." He looked broken, blaming himself. He was treating her like a fragile object he had to hide away in a vault. And the old Tessa, the one who was sweet and unambitious, would have agreed. The new Tessa did not. She walked right up to him, grabbing the lapels of his expensive suit, forcing him to look down at her. "Listen to me. Dante Russo. I am not some porcelain doll you just acquired. I am not your vulnerability. Do I look afraid?" He stared at her, stunned. "I spent my entire life being afraid," she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. afraid of my parents' disappointment, afraid of not being good enough for Ethan, afraid of being alone. And then I walked into that church, and I faced all of it. I am done being afraid." She let go of his suit, her hands moving to cup his face, her new, heavy sapphire ring cold against his jaw. "That man, Vitali, he doesn't know you, and he doesn't know me. I am not afraid. I am with you. And if that means I have to live in your world, then I will. But I will not hide. I am not your weakness." Dante stared at her, his dark eyes searching hers, and then he did something she had never seen him do. He laughed. It was not a laugh of humor. It was a low, rough, astounded sound of pure disbelief and adoration. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, his arms a steel cage around her. "My God, Tessa," he whispered, his voice thick. "What did I ever do to deserve you?" 2 weeks later, he proved he had listened. The city's largest philanthropic event, the Children's Wing fundraiser, was an event Dante had chaired from a distance for 5 years. Ever since the loss of his sister, it was his one non-negotiable public appearance. "You don't have to come," he told her, adjusting the cuffs of his tuxedo. "Vitali has been, handled, but the whispers are still there. It will be a room full of lions." "Good," Tessa said, zipping up the back of a deep emerald green gown he had bought for her. "I've never met a lion." When they walked into the ballroom, it was a repeat of the wedding, the music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses. It all stopped. But this was different. At the wedding, Tessa had been a scandal. Tonight, standing on Dante Russo's arm, she was a queen. She was radiant. She was confident. The woman who had once hidden by the potted plants was now the center of the universe. She met the stares of the city's elite, not with fear, but with a calm, serene smile. Dante was a protective, dark shadow at her side, his hand possessively on the small of her back, but his eyes were on her, filled with a burning, public pride. Halfway through the night, Dante was called to the stage. He spoke for less than 2 minutes, his voice rumbling with quiet authority, pledging a 7-figure donation. "And now," he said, surprising the MC, "I'd like to invite to the stage the real reason we're all here, the woman who, in a very short time, has reminded me why we fight for those who can't fight for themselves, my fiancé, Tessa Morano." Tessa's heart stopped. She looked at him, panicked, but he was just smiling, waiting for her. She walked onto the stage, her legs shaking, the spotlight blinding. Dante didn't leave. He stood to the side, his arms crossed, his gaze a steel support. She stepped up to the microphone. I'm not a public speaker," she began, her voice trembling slightly. The room was silent. "I'm not like most of you. I wasn't born into this. Until very recently. I was a girl who was very, very good at hiding. I was told I was disposable. I was told I wasn't enough. I was told to be quiet and to be supportive of people who were hurting me." She glanced at Dante, and he nodded. "Just once. And I believed them," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "For a very long time, I believed them. Because betrayal is a sickness. It makes you think you're the one who's weak. It makes you forget your own strength." She looked out at the sea of faces, at all the people who had gossiped about her, pitied her, and dismissed her. "But I'm here to tell you that strength isn't about never falling. It's not about being the loudest person in the room or having the biggest ring." Her eyes, for a second, found the table where a gossip columnist was scribbling furiously. "Strength is finding the courage to show up, even when you're terrified. It's about finding one person who sees you, really sees you, and lets you be strong. Tonight, we are here for children who have been betrayed by life, by circumstance, by the people who are supposed to protect them. Let's be the people who see them. Let's be their reason to fight." She finished. The ballroom was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. And then it started. A single person, clapping. Then another. And then the entire room erupted in a standing ovation. Dante was the first one to her, his face stripped bare of its mask, his eyes shining. He didn't kiss her. He just took her hand and raised it to his lips, a gesture of fealty that the entire room witnessed. The past, however, had one last, dying breath. A few days later, a call came to the penthouse. It was Amelia. Tessa took the call on the balcony, Dante a silent, supportive presence in the doorway. "Tessa?" Amelia's voice was not the shrill, triumphant one from the wedding. It was small, watery and slurred. She was crying. "Amelia, I saw the pictures from the fundraiser." A pathetic, wet sniffle. You looked beautiful." Tessa waited. "He's miserable." "Tess, Ethan, he's not here. He's been gone for days. He won't even talk to me. All he talks about is you, about the mistake he made. He said your fiancé was right. He said he regrets it. Every minute." The confession was so raw, so full of jealousy and regret. It was almost pathetic. The winner was sitting in an empty house, her honeymoon canceled, her new husband obsessed with the ghost of his ex. He ruined my life," Amelia sobbed. "And Mom and Dad, they won't even answer my calls. They blame me. They blame me for the scandal you caused." Tessa listened to her sister, the woman who had stolen her life, now weeping because that life had turned to ash in her hands. The old Tessa would have felt a vicious stab of triumph, but the new Tessa just felt tired. "What do you want, Amelia?" Tessa asked, her voice calm. I want you to fix it," Amelia wailed. "Tell them it's not my fault. Tell Ethan to come home. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry." It was the apology Tessa had craved for months, the one she had needed to hear. And now that it was here, it was meaningless. It was just the sound of a spoiled child who had broken her favorite toy and wanted a new one. "I can't fix this for you, Amelia," Tessa said, and her voice was not unkind. It was just final. "I can't give you Ethan, and I can't give you back your reputation. That's gone. But I'm your sister. You stopped being my sister when you chose to build your happiness on top of my pain," Tessa said, the steel returning. "I don't hate you, Amelia, but I don't forgive you. I don't have space for this anymore. I'm choosing peace." She hung up the phone. She didn't block the number. She just let it go. She turned and walked into Dante's arms, burying her face in his chest, and let the last, final thread of her old life break. That night, the city was quiet, the sky clear. They were in bed, the curtains left open, the moonlight and the distant city glow painting the room in shades of silver and blue. They hadn't made love. They were just together, limbs tangled, skin against skin, Tessa's head on his chest, her fingers idly tracing the scars on his ribs. She was almost asleep, her breathing deep and even when he spoke, his voice a low rumble beneath her ear. "They're all afraid of me, you know," he said, his voice quiet, reflective. "Vitale, your family, the entire city. They think I'm a monster. They think you're my weakness, the one thing they can use to destroy me." Tessa lifted her head, propping herself on his chest to look at him. His dark hair was mussed, his eyes soft in the dim light. "You're not a monster," she whispered. "I am," he said, his voice flat, honest. "To them, to anyone who threatens what is mine, but not to you." He lifted his hand, capturing hers. He turned it over, his gaze tracing the lines of her palm as if it were a map of his world. He pressed a soft, warm kiss into the center of it. He looked up at her, his eyes holding hers, and in them, she saw the truth. She saw the man, not the Don. She saw the boy who had lost his sister, and the man who had found his reason. "You're not my weakness, Tesoro," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion that was deeper than love. "You're my reason." The story closes not on a grand wedding, not on a ballroom full of spectators. It closes on a quiet airfield 2 weeks later. Tessa is standing on the tarmac, wearing a simple linen dress, her hair unbound and blowing in the wind. Dante is beside her, his tie loosened, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder. He's watching her, a small, genuine smile on his face. She's looking at the small, private jet waiting for them. "Where are we going?" she asks. "Home," he says, and he takes her hand. They are flying to Sicily, not for a party, Not for status, but for a quiet ceremony in the courtyard of an old, ruined villa, with only the sea and the sky as their witnesses. This time, there is no audience. There is no shame. There is just, finally, love. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We are so grateful to have you here. Please, take a moment to comment below and let us know what part of the world you are listening from. We love knowing where our stories are traveling. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss a new chapter. And finally, let us know your thoughts on Tessa and Dante in English. In the comments, we read every single one,